Her single mother, exhausted and with nowhere to live, falls asleep on the stairs of a luxurious mansion. What she didn't know was that, from the top of the window, the real owner was watching her in silence. But everything changes when he sees the triplets next to her, children who are perfect copies of himself. In shock, he immediately climbs down, and what he discovers that night will change their lives forever. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. Sarah clutched the worn straps of her tattered handbag, her heart pounding against her chest as she guided her 3 exhausted children toward the marble staircase of the imposing mansion. The streetlights cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, and the autumn wind whispered through the carefully trimmed hedges. This wasn't where she had imagined herself just a few months ago, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The children, identical triplets with striking features that sometimes made her breath catch, huddled close to her, their small bodies trembling from the cold and exhaustion. Tommy, the youngest by mere minutes, pressed his face against her side, while Marcus and James leaned against each other, their eyes heavy with sleep. She had managed to keep them fed today, but tomorrow was another uncertainty that gnawed at her conscience. The marble steps, though cold and unwelcoming, offered more shelter than the park benches they'd occupied for the past few nights. Sarah positioned the children in the most protected corner, wrapping them in the 2 thin blankets she'd managed to save from their previous life. A life that seemed like a distant dream now, when she had a job, a small apartment, and dignity. The automatic gates of the surrounding mansions hummed occasionally, making her flinch. Each time a car passed by, she held her breath, praying they wouldn't be noticed. Being chased away like unwanted debris had become a familiar humiliation, but she couldn't bear to see that fear in her children's eyes again. The loss of her administrative assistant position had been the first domino to fall. The company's restructuring had seemed routine at first, until she found herself among the hundreds deemed redundant. She had savings, yes, but with 3 growing boys, it hadn't lasted long. Then came the crushing blow. Her application for assistance was rejected due to a system error that labeled her as employed when she wasn't. From her vantage point on the steps, Sarah watched the few remaining lights in the surrounding houses to go dark one by one. The mansion behind her remained silent, its windows like dark eyes watching over them. She hadn't chosen this spot randomly. The security cameras she'd noticed meant that at least no one would dare to harm them here. Tommy coughed in his sleep, a sound that made her heart clench. His respiratory issues had always been a concern, and the cold nights weren't helping. She pulled him closer, trying to shield him from the biting wind. Marcus and James stirred briefly before settling back into their exhausted slumber, their faces peaceful despite their circumstances. Sarah leaned back against the cold marble, her mind wandering to that night years ago, the company party, the unexpected connection with the charming executive, the whirlwind evening that had changed her life forever. She had never told him about the pregnancy. He'd been transferred to the international office before she even knew herself, and finding him had seemed impossible. Besides, what proof did she have? It would have looked like nothing more than a desperate grab for money. The sound of movement from inside the mansion made her tense. A light flickered on in one of the upper windows, and Sarah instinctively drew her children closer. Through the glass, she could make out a silhouette. Tall, masculine, standing perfectly still. Was someone watching them? The thought sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Another car passed by, its headlights sweeping across the stairs. Sarah held perfectly still, trying to make herself and the children as invisible as possible. The car slowed briefly before continuing on its way, and she released the breath she'd been holding. They just needed to make it through one more night. Tomorrow she would try again to fix the system error, to find work, to rebuild some semblance of stability for her boys. What Sarah couldn't know was that the figure in the window hadn't moved. For nearly an hour, transfixed by the scene below, the man stood in his darkened study, a forgotten glass of whiskey in his hand, as he studied the family huddled on his steps. Something about the children's features had caught his attention, something hauntingly familiar that stirred long-buried memories. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in soft pastels when Alexander Hamilton pressed his forehead against the cool glass of his study window. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not after what he'd observed throughout the night. The resemblance was uncanny. Those three boys sleeping on his steps bore features so similar to his own childhood photos that it felt like looking through a time portal. His morning routine lay forgotten as he reached for his phone, fingers hovering over the keypad, before pressing the intercom button to his security team. "James, could you do something for me?" His voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. "The family on our steps. Bring them breakfast. Coffee for the mother, hot chocolate for the children, and pastries. Make it seem casual, natural." The security guard's response was immediate and professional, though Alexander detected a note of relief. Had his staff been aware of their visitors? Had they been watching too, wondering if he would notice? He observed as James emerged from the security booth, carrying a tray laden with breakfast items. The woman, he still didn't know her name. Startled at first, her body tensing protectively around her children, from his vantage point, Alexander watched the scene unfold. The woman's initial reluctance, the children's eager acceptance of the warm food, the way she carefully rationed the pastries among them before taking a small bite herself. Every gesture, every movement, spoke of a mother's devotion and desperate circumstances. His mind raced through possibilities. If his suspicions were correct, if these children were. He shook his head, trying to organize his thoughts. The timing would match. That company party, the night that had seemed like a beautiful dream in the midst of his high-pressure career. The administrative assistant with the infectious laugh and intelligent eyes, Sarah, he remembered now. Sarah Mitchell. The children were finishing their breakfast when Alexander's assistant, Maria, arrived for the day. She found him still, standing by the window, his usual impeccable appearance slightly disheveled from the sleepless night. "Sir, your 9 o'clock call to reschedule and the board meeting." Her voice trailed off as she followed his gaze to the family below. "Maria, I need you to clear my schedule for the day," Alexander said, his voice quiet but firm. "And please, find out everything you can about Sarah Mitchell. She worked for the company about 8 years ago in the administrative department. Maria's efficiency was legendary, and within an hour, she had compiled a comprehensive report. Sarah Mitchell had indeed worked for Hamilton Industries until the recent corporate downsizing. Her performance reviews had been exemplary, her departure purely a numbers decision. The system error that had denied her assistance was real, a glitch that had affected several former employees. Alexander sat heavily in his leather chair, the weight of revelation pressing down on him. 3 children, all around 7 years old, born 8 months after that party, after his sudden transfer to the London office. He had never known, had never even suspected. The thought of what Sarah must have gone through, alone and uncertain, made his chest tight with guilt. Through the window, he watched as Sarah gathered her children, preparing to leave their marble sanctuary. The boys moved with a synchronized grace, helping each other straighten clothes and fold blankets. Even in their obvious poverty, there was dignity in their movements, a resilience that spoke of careful upbringing. Maria cleared her throat softly. "Sir, what would you like me to do?" The question carried layers of meaning. They both knew this situation required delicate handling. One wrong move could shatter whatever fragile opportunity lay before them. Alexander straightened his tie, a habit born of years in the corporate world. Have security ensure they don't leave yet. Get the guest house prepared. Fresh linens, stocked refrigerator, children's clothes in various sizes, but don't make it obvious. We don't want to frighten them. As Maria left to make arrangements, Alexander remained at his window, watching Sarah interact with her sons. Each gesture, each tender touch spoke of years of sacrifice and unconditional love. He had missed so much, had been absent for so many crucial moments. The thought filled him with a profound sadness and an unexpected determination. The morning sun now fully illuminated the marble steps, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Alexander knew the next few moments would change multiple lives forever. He straightened his shoulders, checked his reflection one last time, and headed toward the mansion's main entrance. It was time to face the past and perhaps build a future he had never imagined possible. Sarah's heart nearly stopped when she saw him emerge from the mansion's grand entrance. Alexander Hamilton, older then, she remembered silver threading through his dark hair, but unmistakably the same man who had captured her heart for one fleeting night all those years ago. She instinctively pulled her children closer, though they were too preoccupied with the remains of their breakfast to notice the tension in her body. His approach was measured, each step deliberate as he crossed the immaculate lawn. Sarah noticed he wore no jacket despite the morning chill, his crisp white shirt and dark tie a stark contrast to their weathered appearance. The years had been kind to him. Success suited Alexander, adding an air of quiet authority to his natural charm. "Sarah," he said softly, coming to stop a respectful distance from the steps. His eyes flickered to the children, lingering on their features with an intensity that made her stomach clench. "I think we need to talk." Marcus, always the most outgoing of the triplets, looked up at the stranger with curious eyes. "Mom?" he questioned, picking up on the charged atmosphere. James and Tommy pressed closer to their mother, their breakfast forgotten. Sarah stood slowly, positioning herself between Alexander and her sons. "Boys, please wait here for a moment." Her voice was steady, betraying none of the earthquake happening in her chest. The children nodded, used to following their mother's instructions without question. She followed Alexander to a nearby garden bench, far enough to speak privately, but close enough to keep the children in sight. The morning sun cast dappled shadows through the leaves above them, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere that felt at odds with the gravity of the moment. "They're mine, aren't they?" Alexander's question was direct, his voice low and controlled, but Sarah could see the tremor in his hands, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the bench. Sarah looked back at her sons, their sons, playing quietly on the steps. The resemblance that she had tried so hard to ignore over the years was impossible to deny now, sitting next to their father. "Yes," she whispered, the word carrying the weight of 7 years of secrets. "Why didn't you tell me?" There was pain in his voice, but not anger. Something else too, regret perhaps. "I would have—" "You were gone," Sarah interrupted, her voice cracking slightly. "Transferred to London before I even knew I was pregnant. And then—" She gestured helplessly. "How could I prove it? What would people think? That I was just another woman trying to trap a successful executive?" Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Sarah's heart ache. "I would have believed you, I would have helped. These years, all these years they've been right here in the city, and I never knew." "We managed," Sarah said, lifting her chin slightly. Pride had kept her going through the hardest times, and it surfaced now, automatic and protective. "They're good boys, smart, kind, resilient, like their mother," Alexander murmured, and Sarah felt her carefully constructed walls tremble. "Tell me about them, please." And so she did. She told him about Marcus's natural leadership, how he always made sure his brothers had equal shares of everything. About James's quiet intelligence, the way he could lose himself in books far above his grade level. About Tommy's artistic soul and his struggles with asthma, which had become more concerning since they lost their home. Alexander listened intently, his expression a complex mixture of wonder and grief. Each detail seemed to hit him physically, the weight of missed moments settling on his shoulders. When Sarah's voice finally faltered, he spoke again, his tone careful and measured. "I want to help, Sarah, not out of guilt or obligation, but because they're my children too. They deserve better than marble steps and donated breakfasts. Let me give them that at least." Sarah stiffened. "I won't give them up. They're all I have." "That's not what I'm asking," Alexander assured her quickly. "I'm suggesting a safe place to live, proper medical care for Tommy, good schools. You'd be with them, of course. I can't know about them and do nothing." The suggestion hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and potential. Complications. Sarah looked back at the boys, now engaged in their favorite game of creating elaborate stories with whatever objects they could find. Even in their current circumstances, they maintained their imagination, their joy in simple things. "I need time to think," she said finally. It's too much to process all at once." Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, but please stay here for now. The guest house is fully furnished, private, no strings attached, just a safe place while you consider everything." Sarah hesitated, years of independence warring with practical necessity. Tommy's morning, cough echoed in her mind along with the memory of countless nights spent worrying about their safety. "Just temporarily," she conceded, "while I figure things out." Relief flooded Alexander's features. He stood, straightening his tie in a gesture Sarah remembered from years ago. "I'll have Maria, my assistant, show you to the guest house. She'll help you get settled. Make sure you have everything you need." As if on cue, an elegant woman in a tailored suit emerged from the mansion, her professional demeanor softening as she approached the children. Sarah watched as Maria introduced herself, her gentle manner immediately putting the boys at ease. Alexander turned to leave, then paused. "Sarah?" When she met his gaze, the intensity there made her breath catch. "Thank you for raising them so well, for being strong when I wasn't there to be strong with you." The words touched something deep inside Sarah, a wound she hadn't realized was still raw. As she watched him walk back to the mansion, she wondered if this moment, this unexpected reunion on a cold autumn morning, would be the beginning of healing for all of them. The guest house exceeded anything Sarah could have imagined. Nestled at the far end of the property, it was a two-story structure that somehow managed to feel both luxurious and welcoming. Maria led them through each room with professional efficiency, pointing out the fully stocked kitchen, the children's, rooms already furnished with beds and toys, and a master suite that made Sarah's eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Mr. Hamilton asked me to ensure you have everything you need," Maria explained, her tone warm, but not patronizing. "There are clothes for everyone in the closets, and I've arranged for a pediatrician to visit tomorrow morning to check on Tommy's cough." The boys explored their new surroundings with cautious excitement, their natural enthusiasm tempered by years of learning not to get too attached to any one place. Tommy stood at the window of what would be their shared bedroom, his small hand pressed against the glass as he watched a pair of squirrels chase each other across the lawn. "Mom," James called from the adjoining bathroom, his voice filled with wonder. "There's a bathtub, a real one." Sarah smiled, though her heart ached at how such a simple thing could bring such joy. Maria caught her expression and quietly excused herself, leaving a business card with her direct number on the kitchen counter. "For anything you need, any time," she said before departing. As evening approached, Sarah found herself sitting on the back porch of the guest house, watching her sons play in the enclosed garden. The security of having walls around them, of knowing they were safe, was almost overwhelming. Marcus had organized his brothers into some sort of elaborate game involving imaginary spacecraft, their laughter carrying across the manicured lawn. A movement near the main house caught her attention. Alexander stood on his balcony watching the children play. Even at this distance, she could see the longing in his posture, the way he leaned forward slightly as if drawn by an invisible force. When he noticed her watching, he raised a hand in greeting but didn't approach, respecting the boundaries she'd set. Inside the guest house, Sarah discovered a laptop on the study desk, a note from Maria explaining it was for her use. Opening it, she found herself staring at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. After a moment's hesitation, she began to search job listings, determined not to let this temporary sanctuary become a permanent dependency. A knock at the front door startled her. Through the security monitor, another luxury she was still getting used to, she saw an elderly man standing on the porch, holding what appeared to be a covered dish. Opening the door cautiously, she was greeted by a warm smile and kind eyes. "I'm Arthur Peterson, your next-door neighbor," he introduced himself, extending the dish. "I thought you might appreciate some home-cooked lasagna. Moving day is always exhausting, especially with little ones." The simple gesture of neighborly kindness, something she hadn't experienced in so long, brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. "Thank you," she managed, accepting the dish. "I'm Sarah and those are my boys, Marcus, James and Tommy." Arthur's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth as he watched the children play. "Wonderful age, 7. My grandson is about the same. Perhaps they could play together sometime." There was no pity in his voice, no judgment, just simple human connection. That evening, as Sarah served Arthur's lasagna on real plates at a real dining table, she watched her sons eat with healthy appetites. Tommy's cough seemed less severe in the climate-controlled environment, and James had already discovered the bookshelf in their room, while Marcus was planning how to arrange their few possessions in their new space. After tucking the boys into beds with clean sheets and warm blankets, Sarah stood in the doorway of their room, listening to their steady breathing. The events of the day felt surreal. The dramatic shift from desperate circumstances to this unexpected sanctuary. Her pride warred with practical necessity, but looking at her peacefully sleeping children, she knew she had to put their needs first. The sound of her phone buzzing interrupted her thoughts. A text from Alexander. "I hope you're all settling in okay. The pediatrician will be here at 9 a.m. No pressure, but I'd like to start getting to know them whenever you think it's appropriate. At your pace." Sarah sat on the edge of her own bed, a real bed with pillows that smelled of fabric softener, and considered her response. The situation was complicated, emotions raw and unresolved. But maybe, just maybe, this unexpected turn of events could lead to something positive for her children. She typed back a simple reply. "Tommy's always been an early riser. He likes to watch the sunrise from the highest point he can find. The back porch has a good view." It wasn't quite an invitation, but it was a start. From her window, she could see lights still on in Alexander's study. The distance between the guest house and the mansion seemed both vast and insignificant, much like the years that had separated them. As she prepared for bed, Sarah realized that while she didn't know what the future held, for the first time in a long time, she felt something close to hope. The sunrise painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink as Alexander made his way across the dewy lawn toward the guest house. His heart raced with each step, Sarah's subtle invitation playing over in his mind. As he approached, he saw a small figure already perched on the back porch steps. Tommy, his youngest son, wrapped in a warm blanket against the morning chill. The calm boy looked up as Alexander's footsteps creaked on the wooden steps, his eyes so similar to Alexander's own, studying the newcomer with quiet intensity. "So you're the man from yesterday," Tommy said softly, his voice carrying a slight wheeze that made Alexander's parental instincts surge unexpectedly. "I am," Alexander replied, carefully keeping his distance. "I'm Alexander. Your mother mentioned you like watching the sunrise." Tommy nodded, turning his attention back to the horizon. "The colors are different every day. Sometimes I try to draw them, but they change too fast to catch them all." He pulled out a worn sketchbook from beneath his blanket, its pages filled with surprisingly sophisticated color studies for a 7-year-old. Alexander sat on the opposite end of the steps, respecting the child's space, while marveling at the artistic sensitivity in one so young. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the sketchbook. Tommy hesitated briefly before sliding it across the wooden planks. Each page revealed a new facet of his son's personality, careful observations of clouds, attempts to capture the way light played through leaves, even a few portraits of his brothers caught in various activities. "These are extraordinary, Tommy," Alexander said honestly, emotion making his voice rough. A small smile tugged at the boy's lips. "Mom says I get it from her grandmother. She was an artist too." He coughed then, a wet sound that concerned Alexander deeply. The pediatrician couldn't arrive soon enough. The back door opened quietly, and Sarah emerged with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to Tommy, hot chocolate with miniature marshmallows, and after a moment's hesitation offered the other to Alexander. Coffee, black, exactly as he'd always taken it. The fact that she remembered such a detail after all these years didn't go unnoticed. Marcus and James are still sleeping, she said, settling on the top step between them. They've always been late risers, but Tommy here is my early bird. They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Tommy continued sketching, occasionally showing his progress to both adults. Alexander found himself enchanted by the way the boy's small hands moved across the paper, creating beauty from simple strokes. "I have a proper art studio in the mansion," Alexander said carefully, directing his words to Sarah while Tommy worked. "It belonged to my mother. She was a painter. It's been closed up since she passed, but, well, all the supplies are still there. Professional quality materials." Sarah tensed slightly, but Tommy's eyes lit up at the mention of art supplies. Before she could respond, the sound of running footsteps came from inside, and Marcus burst through the door, James close behind. "Mom! Tommy! You won't believe what we found in the garden," Marcus exclaimed, then stopped short at the sight of Alexander. James bumped into his brother's back, creating a momentary tangle of limbs and surprised expressions. Alexander's heart clenched at the sight of all three boys together, their similarities to him even more striking in the morning light. Marcus recovered first, straightening up with a confidence that reminded Alexander of himself at that age. "Good morning, Mr. Hamilton," Marcus said formally, clearly trying to match what he perceived as the appropriate tone. James hung back slightly, observing everything with thoughtful eyes that missed nothing. "Good morning, boys," Alexander replied, keeping his voice casual, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I was just admiring Tommy's artwork. I understand you've discovered something interesting in the garden." Marcus's excitement overcame his initial reserve. "There's a fountain back there with fish in it, real ones, and James thinks he saw a turtle." "That's the koi pond," Alexander explained, watching their faces light up with curiosity. "Some of those fish have been there for 20 years. My mother used to name them all." 20 years, James spoke for the first time, his voice soft but eager. "How long do koi fish live?" "Some can live up to 50 years or more," Alexander replied, delighting in the way James's eyes widened at this information. "Would you like to know more about them? I have some books in the library." Sarah cleared her throat gently and Alexander caught himself. He was moving too fast, letting his enthusiasm override the delicate nature of their situation. But before he could backtrack, James surprised them all. "Could we see them? The books, I mean, and the library." The quiet boy's request hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Sarah looked at her middle son, seeing the genuine interest in his eyes, then at Tommy, who was still engrossed in his sketching but clearly listening. Marcus bounced slightly on his toes, trying to contain his own curiosity. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we could arrange a proper visit. After Tommy sees the doctor this morning." She met Alexander's gaze, her expression a complex mixture of caution and consideration. "If that would be convenient." Alexander felt hope surge in his chest but kept his voice steady. "The library is always open, and so am I, whenever you're all ready." The morning sun now fully illuminated the garden, creating long shadows across the lawn. The koi pond's surface glittered in the distance, promising adventures yet to come. As Sarah gathered the boys for breakfast and preparation for the doctor's visit, Alexander watched his newly discovered family with a heart full of possibilities and prayers that he wouldn't somehow mess this up. Maria Chen sat at her desk in the corporate headquarters of Hamilton Industries, her fingers hovering over her keyboard as she reviewed the latest batch of emails. The morning's correspondence included several marked urgent from the board of directors, all circling around the same topic: Alexander's sudden withdrawal from his scheduled appearances and meetings. She glanced through the glass walls of her office toward the empty executive suite where Alexander usually worked. For the first time in 15 years, he hadn't arrived before dawn to tackle the day's challenges. The corporate rumor mill was already churning with speculation. A soft knock on her doorframe drew her attention. Patricia Walsh, the company's head of legal affairs, stood there with an expression that immediately set Maria's internal alarms ringing. "Do you have a moment?" Patricia asked, though her tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. Maria gestured to the chair across from her desk, quickly closing several confidential files on her computer screen. "What can I help you with, Patricia?" The lawyer settled into the chair, her perfectly manicured hands clasping a thick folder. "The board is concerned about Alexander's recent distraction. There are rumors about a woman and children staying in his guest house. Given the delicate nature of our ongoing negotiations with Eastern Continental, any potential scandal could be devastating." Maria kept her expression neutral, though her loyalty to Alexander made her want to defend him immediately. Mr. Hamilton's personal life has never affected his professional judgment before. "Perhaps," Patricia conceded, "but this situation appears different. Our sources suggest these children might be his." She paused, letting the implications hang in the air. "The board has asked me to review all employee contracts from 7 to 8 years ago, focusing on any female administrative staff who left suddenly." A chill ran down Maria's spine as she realized the direction this was heading. "That's quite an undertaking," she said carefully. "May I ask why?" Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Let's just say we're being thorough. The board feels it would be best to handle any potential claims quickly and quietly. We've had similar situations before." Maria's mind raced to the contract she'd helped Sarah sign just yesterday, a standard residential agreement for the guest house. Had she missed something? Some hidden clause that could be used against the young mother? "I'll need access to all personnel files from that period," Patricia continued, sliding a formal request across the desk. "And any current correspondence between Alexander and this woman." "I'll have to check with Mr. Hamilton first," Maria replied, not touching the document. "As you know, many of those files contain confidential information." Patricia's smile tightened. "The board's authority supersedes individual privacy concerns in matters that could affect shareholder value. I'm sure you understand." She stood, smoothing her impeccable suit. "I'll expect those files by end of day." After Patricia left, Maria sat in her office, mind working furiously. She'd seen this pattern before, the board using supposed concerns about corporate stability to justify intrusive investigations into personal matters. Usually, it ended with quiet settlements and ironclad non-disclosure agreements. She picked up her phone, then set it down again. Alexander had asked not to be disturbed this morning during the children's doctor appointment, but this couldn't wait. She needed to warn him about what was coming. A new email popped up on her screen from Curtis Montgomery, the board's chairman, requesting an urgent meeting about succession planning. Maria's concern deepened. The board wasn't just looking to contain a potential scandal, they were positioning themselves for something bigger. She opened a secure document and began typing rapidly, documenting everything she'd observed over the past few days. Dates, times, conversations, anything that might be relevant. Years of working in corporate environments had taught her the value of keeping detailed records. The sound of elevated voices in the corridor drew her attention. 2 board members walked past her office, engaged in intense discussion. She caught fragments of their conversation, liability issues, and perfect opportunity to transition. Maria's protective instincts kicked into high gear. She'd worked with Alexander for over a decade, had seen his integrity in action countless times. She wasn't about to let corporate politics destroy what could be a chance for him to connect with his children. She reached for her phone again, this time sending a carefully worded text to Alexander. "Professional matter requires immediate attention. Board meeting called. Legal reviewing old contracts. Please call when convenient." Looking out her window at the city skyline, Maria could see storm clouds gathering in the distance. A fitting metaphor, she thought, for what was coming. But storms could be weathered with proper preparation, and she intended to make sure Alexander and his newly discovered family had every possible protection. Her computer chimed with another email, this one from the PR department, asking for guidance on handling media inquiries about Alexander's sudden schedule changes. Maria straightened in her chair, her expression setting into one of determined focus. She had work to do, and not much time to do it. In her years as Alexander's assistant, she'd developed a sixth sense for corporate maneuvering. Right now, that sense was screaming that the board was preparing for something big, something that could threaten not just Alexander's position, but the fragile new connections he was trying to build with his children. She began typing again, this time drafting a series of contingency plans. Whatever the board was planning, she would make sure Alexander had options. After all, some things were more important than corporate politics, like the chance to right a wrong and build a family. The pediatrician's visit had gone better than expected. Dr. Emily Rivera sat with Sarah in the guest house's living room, reviewing her findings, while the boys played quietly in their room upstairs. Alexander, who had been anxiously pacing the garden outside, had been invited in to hear the results. Tommy's respiratory issues are manageable with the right treatment plan, Dr. Rivera explained, her warm brown eyes moving between Sarah and Alexander. I'm recommending a daily preventive inhaler and some lifestyle adjustments. The good news is that this environment, clean air, controlled temperature, minimal allergens, is already helping significantly. Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly at the positive prognosis, though her mind was already calculating the cost of ongoing medical care. As if reading her thoughts, Alexander spoke up. I'll take care of all medical expenses, of course, and any specialists Dr. Rivera recommends. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. The message was brief but concerning. Need to speak with you privately. Important. Can you meet me at the Silver Spoon Cafe in an hour? Alexander's phone chimed almost simultaneously. He frowned at whatever he saw on the screen, his expression darkening. I need to handle something at the office, he said, already standing. Dr. Rivera, thank you for coming. Sarah, please make sure any prescriptions are filled immediately. Maria will handle the arrangements. After the doctor left and Alexander had hurried away to deal with whatever corporate crisis had arisen, Sarah found herself facing a dilemma. The boys were settled and safe in the house, but Maria's message had seemed urgent. A quiet knock at the back door provided an unexpected solution. Arthur Peterson, their elderly neighbor, stood there with a fresh batch of cookies. Thought the boys might enjoy these after their doctor's visit, he said with his characteristic warm smile. When Sarah explained her situation, his face lit up. I'd be happy to keep an eye on them for an hour. My grandson's old toys are still in the entertainment room. I'm sure they'd love to explore them. The Silver Spoon Cafe was a quiet establishment, a few blocks from Hamilton Industries' corporate headquarters. Maria was already there when Sarah arrived, sitting in a secluded corner booth with several folders spread before her. Thank you for coming, Maria said, her usually composed demeanor showing signs of strain. I discovered something in the guest house contract that you need to be aware of. She pulled out a document, pointing to a seemingly innocuous paragraph near the end. This clause here, it's not standard. It was inserted specifically for your situation. Sarah leaned forward, reading the dense legal text carefully. Her blood ran cold as she understood the implications. The clause essentially gave the corporate board the right to contest her custody of the children if they deemed her emotionally or financially unstable. But Alexander wouldn't, Sarah began, then stopped as Maria shook her head. This wasn't Alexander's doing. The board is making moves behind his back. They see your presence and the children's existence as a threat to corporate stability. Maria's voice was low and urgent. They've done this before, using similar clauses to pressure other women into silence and separation. Sarah's mind raced back to all the times she'd seen Alexander watching the boys, the genuine emotion in his eyes, the careful way he was trying to build a connection. Does he know about this? Not yet. I'm meeting with him right after this. Maria gathered her papers, her movements precise and controlled. But Sarah, you need to be prepared. The board won't stop at legal maneuvering. They'll dig into your past, your finances, anything they can use to paint you as an unfit mother. The thought made Sarah feel physically ill. After everything she'd done to protect and provide for her children, after all the sacrifices and struggles, to have her motherhood questioned by corporate lawyers who knew nothing about her family. What can I do? She asked, her voice steady. Despite her inner turmoil, Maria pulled out another document. First, we document everything. Every interaction with the board, every conversation, every attempt they make to pressure you. Second, we get ahead of their narrative. I have contacts in family law who can help establish a strong record of your parental capability. Sarah stared at her half-empty coffee cup, thinking of her boys, of Tommy's artistic sensitivity, Marcus's protective nature, James's quiet intelligence. Everything she'd done for the past 7 years had been for them. She wouldn't let anyone threaten that, not even a powerful corporate board. "There's something else you should know," Maria added, her voice even lower. "The board isn't just targeting you. They're using this situation to challenge Alexander's position as well. They've called an emergency meeting about succession planning." Sarah looked up sharply. "They're trying to force him out." Maria nodded grimly. "They see this as an opportunity, a personal scandal, a hidden family, a CEO, distracted by emotional matters. It's the perfect storm for a corporate takeover." For a moment, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the forces aligning against her family. Then something shifted inside her. The same determination that had carried her through years of single motherhood, through poverty and hardship, surfaced with renewed strength. "Let them try," she said quietly, her voice carrying steel beneath its softness. "I've fought harder battles with less help. I won't let them use my children as pawns in their corporate game." Maria's expression showed a mix of respect and relief. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Now let's talk strategy. Alexander will need allies in this fight, and you, Sarah, might be the strongest one he could have." Alexander stood at the window of his office watching the city bustle below while Maria detailed her discoveries. Each word felt like another weight added to his shoulders, but it was the photos spread across his desk that truly haunted him. Surveillance images of Sarah and the boys, clearly taken over the past few days, annotated with clinical observations about their interactions. "The board isn't just gathering ammunition," Maria explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They're building a case. These photos, the hidden clause, the emergency meeting, it's all part of a coordinated strategy to force both you and Sarah into a corner." Alexander turned from the window, his expression hardened by years of corporate battles. "They want to use my children as leverage." It wasn't a question. "After everything that's happened, all the years I missed, they think they can threaten my family to control the company." "It's more complicated than that," Maria said, pulling out another folder. "I've been doing some digging. Remember those similar cases Patricia mentioned? There's a pattern. The board has used these tactics before, but not just to handle potential scandals. They've been systematically removing any executives who might oppose their more aggressive business strategies." Alexander sat heavily in his chair, his mind racing through implications. "The Eastern Continental deal. They want to push through the merger without the ethical oversight I've been insisting on." "Exactly. Your sudden personal situation gives them the perfect opportunity to discredit you and install someone more amenable to their plans." Maria's expression showed her distaste for the corporate maneuvering. A knock at the door interrupted them. Patricia Walsh entered without waiting for a response, her smile as artificial as ever. "Alexander, the board is ready for you now. We have some concerns to discuss about recent developments." Alexander met her gaze steadily. "I'm sure you do. Patricia, just as I have some concerns about unauthorized surveillance and manipulated contracts." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "We're merely exercising due diligence in protecting company interests. Surely you understand the board's position, given the unusual circumstances." "The circumstances," Alexander said quietly, "are that I have 3 children I never knew about, and instead of helping me build a relationship with them, the board is treating them as a corporate liability to be managed. Children born to a former employee who suddenly reappeared at your doorstep," Patricia countered smoothly. "You can understand our concern about potential exploitation." Alexander felt his temper rise, but years of boardroom negotiations helped him maintain his composure. "Sarah didn't suddenly reappear. She was driven to desperation by the very downsizing policies this board pushed through against my recommendations, the same policies that led to the system error denying her assistance." "Nevertheless," Patricia pressed, "the board feels that your emotional involvement in this situation compromises your judgment. We have a responsibility to shareholders." "To shareholders, or to the Eastern Continental merger?" Alexander interrupted. Satisfaction. flickering through him as Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "Yes, I know about that. Just as I know about the other executives who were pushed out when they raised ethical concerns about board decisions." A tense silence filled the office. Patricia's smile had disappeared entirely now. "The board is waiting, Alexander. I suggest you consider your position carefully before making any rash decisions." After she left, Maria quickly outlined what she'd learned from her meeting with Sarah. "She's stronger than they realize," Maria concluded, "and she's willing to fight." Alexander stared at the photos on his desk, his children playing, laughing, living their lives unaware of the corporate vultures circling above them. He thought of Tommy's artistic sensitivity, of James's quiet intelligence, of Marcus's natural leadership. He thought of Sarah's years of sacrifice and determination. "Contact Jerome Matthews in PR," he instructed Maria. "Tell him I want every detail about the board's previous similar cases on my desk by morning. And get me a meeting with Sarah tonight. We need to coordinate our strategy." "Already arranged," Maria replied with a slight smile. "She'll meet you in the garden after the boys are asleep, and, Alexander, she had an interesting suggestion about Arthur Peterson." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "The neighbor? What about him?" "He's not just any retired neighbor. He was a federal judge specialized in corporate ethics cases. Sarah did some research after their conversations. He chose that guest house specifically because he's been monitoring Hamilton Industries since the first questionable board decisions." For the first time that day, Alexander felt a genuine smile tugging at his lips. "So we might have an ally with significant legal experience right next door. Maria, remind me to give you a substantial raise when this is over." "First, let's make sure there's still a company to pay me from," she replied dryly. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Remember, they'll try to provoke an emotional response. Don't give them what they want." Alexander straightened his tie, his expression settling into the mask of corporate confidence he'd perfected over years of leadership. "They want to talk about family values and corporate responsibility? Fine. Let's show them exactly what those words really mean." The Hamilton Industries boardroom had always felt like a gladiatorial arena to Alexander, but never more so than today. 12 pairs of eyes watched him as he took his seat at the head of the long mahogany table, each gaze calculating and cold. Curtis Montgomery, the board chairman, sat at the opposite end, his silver hair and expensive suit projecting an air of paternal authority that Alexander knew masked a ruthless corporate mind. "Thank you for joining us, Alexander," Curtis began, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a seasoned politician. "We've called this emergency session to discuss some concerns about recent developments in your personal life that may impact the company's stability." Alexander kept his expression neutral, remembering Maria's warning about emotional responses. "I wasn't aware that my personal life fell under board oversight, Curtis. Perhaps you could clarify the specific concerns." Patricia Walsh cleared her throat, spreading documents before her. "We have evidence of unauthorized occupancy of company property, potentially fraudulent claims of paternity, and behavior that could be construed as emotional instability affecting leadership decisions." "Interesting choice of words," Alexander replied calmly. "Particularly unauthorized and fraudulent, given that I own the property in question, and DNA testing has already confirmed my paternity of the children." A murmur ran through the board members. Curtis leaned forward slightly. "You've confirmed paternity? Without consulting the board about potential corporate implications?" "I wasn't aware I needed board approval to acknowledge my own children," Alexander said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make several members shift uncomfortably. "But since we're discussing corporate implications, let's talk about the Eastern Continental merger." The change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Curtis's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on his pen. "The merger negotiations are not relevant to this discussion." "Aren't they?" Alexander opened his laptop, turning it to display a series of financial projections. "These numbers suggest otherwise. The timing of this emergency session coincides remarkably well with my recent objections to certain aspects of the merger agreement." Patricia intervened smoothly. "The board is simply concerned about the company's public image. Her CEO with a suddenly discovered family, children born to a former employee who was terminated during corporate restructuring. Surely you can see how this might affect shareholder confidence. Alexander felt a surge of anger, but channeled it into precise, measured words. Let's discuss shareholder confidence, Patricia. Specifically, how it might be affected by evidence of systematic board interference in executives' personal lives, or by the pattern of ethical oversight being undermined through carefully orchestrated removals of key personnel. The boardroom. Temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Curtis's practiced smile had vanished entirely. Are you making accusations, Alexander? I'm stating facts, Alexander replied, pulling out a folder Maria had prepared. Facts documented by former executives, supported by internal communications, and witnessed by individuals with significant legal expertise, including, interestingly enough, a former federal judge specializing in corporate ethics cases. Several board members exchanged worried glances. Alexander continued, his voice steady and controlled. You've used this tactic before, manipulating personal situations to force out executives who opposed your methods, but this time you've miscalculated. This isn't about corporate maneuvering or power plays. This is about my children. Children you never knew existed until a week ago, Curtis pointed out sharply. Children whose mother was conveniently homeless enough to seek shelter at your doorstep. The timing seems remarkably opportune, given the upcoming merger vote. Alexander stood slowly, his height allowing him to command the room's attention. Let me be very clear about something. Sarah Mitchell raised our children alone for 7 years, working multiple jobs, never seeking publicity or compensation. When she lost her position due to your aggressive downsizing policies, she still didn't reach out to me. She ended up at my door by pure chance, or fate if you believe in such things. He began walking around the table, his presence making several board members shift nervously. But now that I know about my children, now that I've seen their faces, heard their voices, witnessed their strength and resilience, do you really think I'll let anyone use them as pawns in a corporate game? The board has a responsibility. Patricia began, but Alexander cut her off. The board has overstepped, repeatedly and systematically. The hidden clause in the guest house contract, the surveillance photos, the attempts to build a case against Sarah's parental fitness, it all demonstrates a pattern of corporate abuse that I'm sure shareholders would find fascinating. Curtis stood abruptly. Are you threatening the board, Alexander? No, Curtis, I'm promising you that if anyone attempts to use my children or their mother as leverage against me, I will bring every questionable board decision, every ethical violation, every manipulated removal into the public eye. And I have the documentation to do it. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander returned to his seat, outwardly calm despite his racing heart. Now, shall we discuss the actual business of this company? Perhaps starting with the ethical concerns about the Eastern Continental merger that you've been so eager to avoid. The board meeting continued for another 2 hours, but the dynamic had shifted dramatically as Alexander presented his concerns about the merger's implications. Supported by careful research and ethical analysis, he could see the realization dawning in various board members' eyes. They had underestimated not just his resolve, but his preparation. When the meeting finally adjourned, Curtis lingered behind. You're playing a dangerous game, Alexander, he warned quietly. No, Curtis, Alexander replied, gathering his materials. I'm finally playing the right game, protecting what matters most. The question is, are you prepared for the consequences of the game you've been playing? The garden was bathed in soft twilight when Sarah stepped out to meet Alexander. The boys were asleep upstairs, their evening filled with stories from Arthur Peterson about his days as a judge, stories that, Sarah now realized, had been carefully chosen to educate her about corporate legal battles. Alexander sat on the stone, bench near the koi pond, his tie loosened and jacket discarded. He looked simultaneously exhausted and energized, like a warrior returning from battle. When he saw Sarah approach, he stood, uncertainty flickering across his features. The board meeting, she began, but he shook his head. First, I need to apologize, he said, gesturing for her to sit. I had no idea about the clause in your contract. I should have been more vigilant, should have protected you and the boys better. Sarah settled onto the bench, watching the koi create ripples in the darkening water. Arthur explained some things about corporate tactics like this. He says it's relatively common, using personal situations as leverage in business disputes. Arthur Peterson, Alexander smiled slightly, seems to be quite the strategic ally. Maria told me about his background. Did you know he was specifically monitoring Hamilton Industries? He mentioned it tonight, Sarah nodded. He's been tracking the board's decisions for years, building a case about ethical violations. When he saw us arrive, he recognized an opportunity to finally bring everything to light. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both watching the garden grow darker. A soft breeze carried the scent of evening jasmine, and somewhere nearby crickets began their nightly symphony. Tommy asked about you at bedtime, Sarah said quietly. He wanted to know if you'd look at more of his drawings tomorrow. And James, he's been reading one of the books from your library, something about marine biology. Alexander's breath caught audibly. And Marcus? Marcus is still cautious, protective, but he mentioned that the koi pond would make a good science project. Sarah smiled at the memory. He's a natural leader, that one, always thinking ahead, planning. Like his mother, Alexander observed softly. When Sarah looked at him questioningly, he continued, I've seen the strength it took to raise them. Alone, Sarah, the determination to keep them safe and cared for no matter what. That's leadership of the highest order. Sarah felt tears threatening but held them back. Tell me about the board meeting. What are we facing? Alexander relayed the confrontation, watching Sarah's expression grow more determined with each detail. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. So they'll back off, she finally asked. For now, Alexander replied cautiously. But Curtis Montgomery didn't become board chairman by giving up easily. We need to be prepared for more subtle attacks, more sophisticated pressure. Then we'll be ready, Sarah said firmly. Arthur has offered to help us. Document everything, every interaction, every pressure tactic. He says public exposure is often the best defense against corporate bullying. Alexander turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Sarah, I want you to know, whatever happens with the board, with the company, my priority is protecting you and the boys. I've missed so much of their lives already. I won't let corporate politics take away any more time. The boys need stability, Sarah said carefully. They've had so much uncertainty in their lives. Whatever we do next, we have to think about how it affects them. I agree completely, Alexander nodded, which is why I've been thinking, what if we approached this differently? Instead of just defending against the board's attacks, what if we showed them and everyone else what real family values look like in corporate leadership? Sarah raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? The board thinks having a family makes me vulnerable, distracted. But what if we demonstrated how it makes the company stronger? Ethical leadership, genuine concern for employees' welfare, policies that support working parents, all the things I've been pushing for, now supported by personal experience. Turn their weapon into your strength, Sarah mused, understanding dawning in her eyes. Use the situation to advocate for better corporate policies. Exactly. And with Arthur's documentation of past board misconduct, we'd have leverage to push through real changes. Alexander's voice grew animated as he outlined his vision. But Sarah, this would put you and the boys in the public eye. I won't do it without your full agreement. Sarah watched the last light fade from the garden, thinking of her children sleeping peacefully upstairs. The boys are already in the middle of this, whether we like it or not. At least this way we're choosing the terms of engagement. And maybe we can help other families in similar situations. Alexander reached out hesitantly, letting his hand rest near hers on the bench, not quite touching, but close enough to bridge the gap of years between them. We make a good team, you know, when it comes to protecting our family. Sarah looked at their almost touching hands, thinking of all the moments that had led to this one. Yes, she said softly. I suppose we do. Above them, a light flickered. On in the boys' room, Tommy's usual signal that he'd woken and wanted company, Sarah stood smoothing her skirt. Duty calls. Sarah? Alexander's voice stopped her. Thank you for raising them so well, for being willing to let me be part of their lives now, for everything. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Thank you for being worth the wait. The art studio was exactly as Alexander had described, a light-filled space at the top of the mansion, walls lined with professional supplies and half-finished canvases. Tommy stood in the doorway, his small hand clutching his sketchbook, eyes wide with wonder at the easels and paint sets before him. This was your grandmother's studio, Alexander explained softly, watching his youngest son's reaction. She loved capturing the morning light just like you do. Sarah hung back, letting father and son share this moment. Over the past week, she'd noticed Tommy's growing comfort with Alexander, his natural artistic sensitivity creating a bridge between them. Now, watching him step tentatively into the studio, she could see another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Can I? Tommy hesitated, looking at a blank canvas propped on an easel. Can I try painting something? Alexander's smile was warm and genuine. Of course, everything here is yours to use. In fact, he crossed to a cabinet, pulling out a small wooden box. These were her special brushes. She always said art supplies should be shared with those who understand their magic. As Tommy explored the studio, carefully examining each brush and paint color, James appeared in the doorway, drawn by curiosity. He carried one of Alexander's books on marine biology, AE, bookmark indicating he was already halfway through. Did your mother paint the ocean? James asked quietly, pointing to a seascape hanging on one wall. She did, Alexander nodded, grateful for his middle son's interest. She loved painting water, said it was the most challenging thing to capture because it was always changing. Like your koi fish. James's eyes lit up at the mention of the pond that had become his favorite study spot. I've been reading about koi. Did you know some species can recognize individual humans? They have memory patterns similar to... As James launched into an enthusiastic explanation of fish cognition, Sarah noticed Marcus lingering just outside the studio. Unlike his brothers, her eldest had maintained a careful distance from Alexander, watching every interaction with protective skepticism. But today, something was different. Marcus held a newspaper clipping in his hand, an article about Hamilton Industries' community outreach programs. Sarah had seen him studying it earlier, his expression thoughtful. Mr. Hamilton, Marcus's voice was formal but steady. Can I ask you something about your company? Alexander turned, careful not to show too much eagerness at this first direct approach. Of course, Marcus. And please, you don't have to call me Mr. Hamilton. Marcus stepped into the studio, his posture straight and serious. This article says your company helps fund education programs for kids who can't afford school supplies. Is that true? It is, Alexander confirmed. We believe every child deserves the tools they need to learn. Even if their parents work for other companies, Marcus pressed, and suddenly Sarah understood. Her eldest was thinking of his friends. From their old neighborhood, children who faced the same struggles they had. Alexander met Marcus's gaze directly. Every child, Marcus, no exceptions. In fact, I've been thinking we could expand that program. Would you be interested in helping me figure out how to reach more families who need it? For the first time, since they'd arrived at the mansion, Sarah saw Marcus's protective shell crack slightly. I might have some ideas. From before, when Mum was trying to find help for Tommy's medicine. I'd love to hear them, Alexander said sincerely. Maybe we could talk about it over lunch. Your brothers could join us. Tommy could show us his artwork, and James could tell us more about koi intelligence. The tension in the room softened as Marcus considered the offer. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but can we have pizza? The kind with extra cheese that Mom likes? Alexander's laugh was full of relief and joy. Pizza sounds perfect. Why don't you help me order? I'm sure you know everyone's favorite toppings. As Marcus moved to join his father, Sarah watched her family beginning to merge and heal. Tommy was already setting up his canvas, his movements confident in this space that seemed made for him. James had settled cross-legged on the floor, enthusiastically sharing fish facts with anyone who would listen. And Marcus, her protective firstborn, was carefully letting down his guard. The morning light streamed through the studio's windows, catching the dust motes in golden beams. Sarah thought of Alexander's mother, the artist who had created this sanctuary. Would she have been pleased to see it coming alive again with children's voices? Would she have recognized her own creative spirit in Tommy's careful brush strokes? Maria appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, but stopped at the scene before her. She caught Sarah's eye and smiled, then quietly backed away. The corporate world could wait. This moment, this gentle building of bridges between father and children, was too precious to interrupt. Alexander looked up from his pizza-ordering consultation with Marcus and caught Sarah watching them. His expression held a mix of gratitude and wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe this moment was real. She offered him a small nod of encouragement, acknowledging how far they'd come and how far they might still go. The sound of Tommy's paintbrush against canvas mixed with James's excited chatter about fish behavior and Marcus's serious discussion of pizza toppings. It was a symphony of ordinary family moments, the kind that Alexander had missed for 7 years, the kind that Sarah had always hoped her children would have. In this sun-filled studio, surrounded by art and memories, their fragmented family was slowly finding its way to wholeness. Not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through simple moments of connection, a shared love of art, a fascination with fish, a conversation about helping others, and yes, even a family debate about pizza toppings. While the Hamilton family was bonding over pizza and art, Curtis Montgomery sat in his private office at Hamilton Industries, reviewing the latest reports from his corporate intelligence team. The surveillance photos of Sarah and the children had proved ineffective, but he wasn't finished yet. There were always other pressure points to exploit. "Sir?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Patricia Walsh is here with the information you requested." Patricia entered, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "We've completed our analysis of Alexander's recent policy proposals," she announced, placing a thick folder on Curtis's desk. "As suspected, he's preparing to introduce major reforms to the company's family leave and employee support programs." Curtis frowned, flipping through the documents. "Cost projections?" "Significant in the short term, but his team has actually demonstrated potential long-term benefits in employee retention and productivity." Patricia's tone suggested she was annoyed by this inconvenient fact. "He's being strategic, backing everything with solid research and financial analysis. He's using his personal situation to push through changes we've been blocking for years," Curtis muttered. "And now, with public sentiment likely to be on his side." He trailed off, studying a particular page more closely. "There's more," Patricia added. "We've discovered that Arthur Peterson, the retired judge living next to the guest house, has been systematically documenting board decisions for the past 5 years. He has connections with several corporate watchdog organizations." Curtis set down the folder, his expression darkening. "Alexander knows this, I assume?" "Based on his comments in the board meeting, yes. He's positioned himself well. Any move against him or the children could trigger Peterson releasing his findings." "What about the Eastern Continental merger?" Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "Alexander's ethical concerns are not unfounded. Our preliminary legal review suggests that several aspects of the deal could face significant regulatory scrutiny." Curtis stood, moving to his window overlooking the city. Hamilton Industries' success had always depended on careful control of its public image and strategic decision-making. Alexander's newfound family threatened to upset that delicate balance. "We need a different approach," he said finally. "Something subtle enough to avoid triggering Peterson's evidence release, but effective enough to make Alexander reconsider his position." "Sir," Patricia's voice held a note of caution, "given the current circumstances, perhaps we should consider—" "Consider what?" Curtis turned sharply, letting Alexander Hamilton reshape this company based on his sudden attack of conscience. watching years of careful planning crumble because he's discovered the joys of fatherhood. A knock at the door interrupted them. Maria Chen entered without waiting for permission, her expression professionally neutral, but her posture radiating determination. "Mr. Montgomery, the PR team needs your sign-off on tomorrow's press statement." She held out a tablet displaying a draft release that made Curtis's blood pressure spike. The headline read, "Hamilton Industries announces comprehensive family support initiative. CEO leads by example." "This wasn't authorized," Curtis snapped, but Maria's expression didn't waver. "Actually, sir, it was approved by the majority of board members this morning. Alexander's presentation of the financial benefits was quite convincing." She smiled slightly. "The market analysts are already predicting a positive response, especially given the current social climate regarding corporate responsibility." Curtis felt the situation slipping through his fingers. "The board can't unilaterally—" "The board," Maria interrupted smoothly, "seems very interested in avoiding any public discussion of its past decisions, particularly those documented by certain retired federal judges." Patricia's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. Curtis stared at Maria, seeing her in a new light. She wasn't just Alexander's efficient assistant, she was a player in this game, and he'd underestimated her. "Alexander wanted me to ensure you received this as well," Maria continued, placing a sealed envelope on Curtis's desk. "His personal invitation to tomorrow's press conference. He thought you might appreciate the opportunity to show a united front in supporting the company's new direction." The implied threat was clear: support the changes or face the consequences of past actions becoming public. Curtis had used similar tactics himself over the years, but he'd never expected to be on the receiving end. "Was there anything else you needed, Mr. Montgomery?" Maria's tone was perfectly professional, but her eyes held a hint of triumph. Curtis forced a smile. "No, thank you, Maria. Please tell Alexander I look forward to tomorrow's announcement." After Maria left, Patricia turned to Curtis. "What now?" Curtis picked up the invitation, his mind already calculating new strategies. "Now we adapt. Alexander wants to play the devoted father and ethical leader. Fine. But he'd better remember that corporate memory is long, and today's allies can become tomorrow's adversaries. And the Eastern Continental merger will proceed," Curtis said firmly, "but perhaps with some modifications to address Alexander's concerns. Sometimes, Patricia, the best way to maintain control is to appear to relinquish it." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across his office, Montgomery began drafting a new plan. He hadn't survived decades in corporate leadership by fighting battles he couldn't win, but he had learned that sometimes seeming defeat could lay the groundwork for future victory. The Hamilton Industries conference room buzzed with anticipation as journalists and corporate stakeholders filed in for the morning's press conference. Maria supervised the final preparations, ensuring everything was perfect, from the lighting to the carefully crafted presentation materials highlighting the company's new family support initiatives. Sarah sat in the front row, her professional attire a far cry from the desperate woman who had sought shelter on marble steps just weeks ago. The boys were safely at home with Arthur, who had offered to continue their impromptu lessons about civic responsibility and corporate ethics. The former judge had proven to be not just an ally, but a mentor to the children, especially Marcus, who showed a keen interest in questions of justice and fairness. Alexander stood near the podium, reviewing his notes one last time. The past few weeks had transformed him in subtle but significant ways. The sharp corporate edge had softened, replaced by something more genuine, a leader who understood not just profit margins, but human costs. Curtis Montgomery entered with several board members, their expressions carefully neutral. The tension in the room shifted slightly, like a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. But when Curtis caught Sarah's eye, she met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. 2 minutes, everyone," Maria announced, her calm efficiency keeping the proceedings on track. Alexander moved to Sarah's side. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, smoothing her skirt. "The boys wanted to wish you luck, Tommy made you something. She handed him a small sketch, a surprisingly sophisticated rendering of their family, including Arthur and Maria, standing together under a bright sun. Alexander's throat tightened as he studied the drawing. He's incredibly talented. We should look into art classes. Already done, Sarah smiled. Maria found a wonderful program. James is joining a marine biology club too, and Marcus. She paused, her smile widening. Marcus asked if he could learn more about how companies work. He says if he's going to help make things better for other families, he needs to understand the system. Before Alexander could respond, Maria signaled that it was time to begin. He squeezed Sarah's hand briefly before moving to the podium, Tommy's drawing tucked carefully in his breast pocket. "Good morning," he began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Today, Hamilton Industries is announcing a comprehensive initiative to support working families and create a more ethical, sustainable corporate culture." As he outlined, the new policies, expanded parental leave, flexible working arrangements, educational support programs. Sarah watched the reactions in the room. Most journalists were taking rapid notes, clearly recognizing the significance of these changes. Some board members shifted uncomfortably, while others seemed genuinely engaged. "These changes," Alexander continued, "aren't just about corporate responsibility. They're about recognizing that our strength as a company comes from our people, their dedication, their resilience, and yes, their families." He paused, his hand touching the pocket where Tommy's drawing rested. "Recent events in my own life have shown me both the challenges working parents face and the incredible potential we waste when we fail to support them properly. I've learned these lessons through personal experience, but the solutions we're presenting today are based on solid research and financial analysis." The presentation continued with detailed breakdowns of the initiative's costs and projected benefits. Alexander handled the technical questions with his usual expertise, but there was a new dimension to his responses, a personal understanding that made his arguments more compelling. Then came the moment Sarah had been both anticipating and dreading. A journalist from the Financial Times raised her hand. "Mr. Hamilton, would you address the rumors about your recently discovered family? How has this situation influenced your new policy directions?" Alexander met Sarah's eyes briefly before responding. "Yes, I recently learned that I have 3 amazing children, triplet boys who are 7 years old. Their mother raised them alone while working multiple jobs, facing exactly the kind of challenges our new initiatives aim to address. She did an extraordinary job under difficult circumstances, and I regret not being there to support them," he continued, his voice steady but emotional. "But this isn't just about my family. It's about every parent who's had to choose between work and childcare, every employee who's struggled to balance professional demands with family needs. Our company's success shouldn't come at the cost of our employees' families." Sarah felt tears threatening, but held them back. This was Alexander's moment of vulnerability, but also his moment of greatest strength. He was transforming their personal story into something larger, a catalyst for real change. The questions continued, ranging from technical details about implementation to broader implications for corporate culture. Alexander handled each one with a combination of professional expertise and personal insight that seemed to resonate deeply with the audience. Near the end, Curtis Montgomery surprisingly took the microphone. "As board chairman, I want to express our full support for these initiatives. Hamilton Industries has always been a leader in corporate innovation. Today, we're proud to lead in corporate humanity as well." The words were perfectly chosen, the delivery flawless. But Sarah caught the calculated look in Curtis's eyes. This wasn't surrender. It was tactical retreat. She made a mental note to warn Alexander that while they'd won this battle, the war wasn't over. As the press conference concluded, journalists clustered around Alexander for additional comments. Maria expertly managed the flow of questions while keeping an eye on the time. They had promised the boys they'd be home for lunch. Sarah stood, gathering her things, when she noticed Patricia Walsh watching her from across the room. The lawyer's expression was unreadable, but her intent focus made Sarah uneasy. Another reminder that in this world of corporate power plays, they needed to remain vigilant. But for now, they had achieved something significant. As she waited for Alexander to finish his interviews, Sarah thought of her sons at home with Arthur, probably designing their own corporate ethics programs or debating the fairness of playground rules. They were safe together and part of something meaningful. Alexander finally broke free, making his way to her side. "Ready to head home?" Marcus texted. "Apparently they're planning some sort of presentation for us about improving the company's environmental policies." Sarah laughed, linking her arm through his, already changing the world, one corporate policy at a time. As they left the conference room, both noticed Curtis watching them, but his calculating gaze no longer held the power to frighten. They had each other now, and more importantly, they had truth on their side. The afternoon sun streamed through the guest house windows as Marcus stood before his family, pointer in hand, presenting his carefully prepared slides about corporate environmental responsibility. James and Tommy sat cross-legged on the floor, attention divided between their brother's presentation and their own projects. James with his marine biology notebook, Tommy adding details to yet another sketch. "And that's why companies should invest in renewable energy," Marcus concluded, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone he'd heard in his father's press conference videos. "It's not just good for the planet, it's good for business." Arthur Peterson, who had stayed to watch his young protégé's presentation, applauded enthusiastically. "Excellent analysis, Marcus. You've really grasped the concept of long-term, strategic thinking." Alexander and Sarah exchanged proud glances. Their eldest son had transformed over the past weeks, his protective instincts channeling into a passionate interest in making systematic changes. The corporate world that had once threatened his family was becoming his tool for helping others. "Very impressive," Alexander agreed, noting the careful research Marcus had clearly done. "Would you be interested in presenting some of these ideas to our Environmental Impact Committee?" Marcus's eyes widened. "Really? But I'm just a kid." "Sometimes children see solutions that adults miss," Sarah said softly. "Remember how you used to organize the other kids at the shelter to share resources? That's exactly the kind of thinking big companies need." "Speaking of sharing," Arthur interjected, "I believe Tommy has something to show us as well." Tommy shyly pulled out a large piece of paper from behind the couch. It was a detailed drawing of the Hamilton Industries building, but reimagined with green spaces, solar panels, and what appeared to be a rooftop garden. "I thought maybe the company could look more like this." Alexander moved closer to examine the drawing, amazed once again by his youngest son's artistic talent. "This is incredible, Tommy. You've even included natural lighting alignments, and is that a butterfly sanctuary?" "For the employees' children," Tommy explained quietly, "so they can see beautiful things while their parents work." James looked up from his notebook. "Actually, butterflies are excellent environmental indicators. Their presence can tell us a lot about the health of an ecosystem. I've been reading about it in the library." Sarah watched her three boys building on each other's ideas, their different perspectives creating something greater than the sum of its parts. Marcus's leadership, Tommy's vision, James's analytical mind. They each brought something unique to the family dynamic. Maria, who had arrived with some documents for Alexander to sign, paused in the doorway to take in the scene. Her usually professional demeanor softened as she watched Tommy explain his butterfly sanctuary concept to an enthralled James. "The board would never expect environmental initiatives to come from children," she murmured to Sarah. "That might be exactly why they'll work." Sarah nodded, understanding the deeper implications. Curtis and his allies were prepared for corporate maneuvering, for adult power plays. But the innocent wisdom of children, that was something their calculated strategies couldn't counter. "Dad," Marcus's voice brought their attention back to the presentation. "Could we maybe start with something small, like a recycling program, for the employee cafeteria?" Alexander blinked at the title Dad. It was the first time Marcus had used it. "Of course," he managed, his voice slightly rough. "Why don't you work with Maria to set it up?" She knows all the right people to contact. The rest of the afternoon flowed with a natural rhythm that still felt miraculous to Sarah. The boys moved between their various interests, Marcus drafting his recycling proposal, James researching butterfly species that could thrive in an urban environment, Tommy adding more details to his architectural vision. Arthur shared stories from his judicial days, carefully chosen to illustrate principles of fairness and responsibility. Maria made notes about implementing the boys' ideas, her strategic mind already seeing ways to use their fresh perspective to strengthen Alexander's corporate reforms. As evening approached, Alexander found Sarah in the kitchen, preparing dinner. While watching the boys through the window, they had moved their activities to the garden where the koi pond had become their favorite thinking spot. "They're amazing," he said softly, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "So, Tuta, I keep wondering how many other brilliant young minds we're missing because their parents are too busy surviving to nurture their talents." Sarah turned to face him, her expression serious. "Then let's make sure that changes. Not just in our company, but everywhere we can reach." "Our company?" Alexander asked, a smile playing at his lips. "Well, according to Marcus's latest organizational chart, I'm the chief family officer," Sarah laughed. "Apparently, it's a crucial position for maintaining work-life balance metrics." Their quiet moment was interrupted by excited shouts from the garden. James had spotted something interesting in the pond, and his brothers were crowding around to see. The setting sun painted their eager faces in warm light, their animated discussion carrying through the open window. "Should we go see what they've discovered?" Alexander asked, already moving toward the door. Sarah watched him hurry to join. Their sons, his corporate persona forgotten in the simple joy of shared discovery. The past weeks had changed all of them, healing old wounds and creating new connections. But perhaps the most profound change was this: the simple ability to be present, to share moments of wonder, to build something meaningful together. Marcus was already explaining his theory about the koi's behavior to Alexander, while James took detailed notes and Tommy sketched the scene. Their voices blended with the evening sounds of the garden, creating a symphony of family life that Sarah had always dreamed of, but never quite believed possible. She joined them by the pond, completing their circle. The future still held challenges. Curtis Montgomery's calculating gaze at the press conference had made that clear. But watching her family together, strong in their unity and purpose, Sarah knew they could face whatever came next. The morning started like any other at Hamilton Industries, but Maria Chen knew something was wrong the moment she arrived at her office. An unmarked envelope lay on her desk, its contents revealing photographs she'd never seen before. Sarah, years younger, talking with Curtis Montgomery outside the company's old headquarters. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she examined the timestamp exactly 1 month before Sarah's departure from the company. The implications were staggering. Curtis hadn't been surprised by Sarah's appearance at Alexander's door. He'd known about her all along. She was still processing this revelation when Patricia Walsh appeared in her doorway. "Interesting reading." "Material?" the lawyer asked, her smile sharp as a blade. "How long have you known?" Maria kept her voice steady, though her mind was racing. "About Curtis's previous connection to Sarah Mitchell?" "Long enough." Patricia entered the office, closing the door behind her. "The question is, what are you going to do with this information?" Maria studied the woman before her, noting the subtle signs of internal conflict beneath her polished exterior. "Why are you showing me this?" Patricia hesitated, an uncharacteristic display of uncertainty. "Because Curtis Montgomery's games have gone too far. I've spent years justifying his methods, convincing myself they were necessary for corporate stability. But using children as pawns," she shook her head. "There's a line." "Tell me everything," Maria said, reaching for her tablet to take notes. The story that emerged was worse than she'd imagined. Curtis had known about Sarah's pregnancy from the beginning. He'd orchestrated Alexander's transfer to London, buried Sarah's attempts to make contact, and deliberately kept them apart, all to maintain control over the company's direction. The why? System error that denied her assistance, Maria asked, though she already suspected the answer. No error, Patricia confirmed. Curtis made sure she'd reach a breaking point. He wanted her to end up at Alexander's door, but as a desperate woman seeking help, not as a mother rightfully demanding support. Why now? Why show me this? Patricia's professionally maintained facade cracked slightly. Because I have a 7-year-old daughter too. Watching Sarah with those boys, seeing how she protected them despite everything, it made me question every decision I've justified in the name of corporate interests. Maria sat back processing the implications. Curtis is still planning something, isn't he? The Eastern Continental merger is just the beginning. He's using Alexander's family-friendly initiatives as cover while he pushes through more aggressive international expansion plans. If those plans succeed, thousands of families could face the same situation Sarah did, Maria finished. Mass layoffs disguised as corporate restructuring. A knock at the door made both women jump. Arthur Peterson stood there, his expression grave. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I believe we need to talk. He held up a file of his own. I've been doing some digging into Curtis's early days at Hamilton Industries. It seems Sarah wasn't the first parent he manipulated for corporate gain. The three conspirators spent the next hour sharing information, building a picture that grew darker with each revelation. Curtis Montgomery had spent decades using personal situations as corporate leverage, destroying families and lives in the name of shareholder value. Alexander needs to know, Maria said finally, and Sarah, she deserves to know the truth too. It will devastate them, Patricia warned. Learning that their separation was deliberately engineered, that their children's early hardships were part of someone's corporate strategy. They're stronger than you think, Arthur countered, and they need to understand what they're really fighting against. This isn't just about corporate policies anymore. It's about preventing history from repeating itself. Maria thought about the family she'd watched grow closer over the past weeks. The boys' laughter in the halls, Sarah's quiet strength, Alexander's transformation from corporate leader to devoted father. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of Curtis's manipulation. Maybe that was their greatest victory. I'll tell them, she decided. But first, we need to make sure all our evidence is secure. Curtis won't stop fighting just because we've discovered his past moves. Arthur nodded approvingly. I have contacts at several news organizations, ethical journalists who've been tracking corporate manipulation patterns. They can help protect the information even if something happens to us. Nothing will happen to anyone, Patricia said firmly. I've spent too long being part of the problem. It's time to be part of the solution. As they formulated their plan, Maria received a text from Alexander. Family dinner at the guest house tonight. The boys want to show us their finished environmental proposal. You're invited, of course. Looking at the message, Maria felt the weight of what she had to tell them. This happy family gathering would turn into something very different once they learned the truth. But they needed to know, needed to understand the full scope of what they were fighting against. Tonight, she told her companions. We'll tell them tonight. They deserve to face this together as a family. Arthur gathered his files, his expression determined. I'll bring all my documentation. Sarah and Alexander need to see the pattern, need to understand that their story, painful as it is, could help prevent other families from facing the same manipulation. Patricia stood to leave, then turned back. Tell Sarah. Tell her I'm sorry. I knew what was happening back then and I did nothing. She deserved better. As her unexpected allies departed, Maria looked again at the photograph of young Sarah with Curtis. The image that was meant to demoralize them would instead become evidence of corporate manipulation at its worst. Sometimes, she reflected, the best weapons against darkness were truth and sunlight. She began preparing her presentation, organizing the evidence chronologically. Tonight, secrets long buried in corporate shadows would finally come to light, and tomorrow they would begin dismantling the system that had torn this family apart in the first place. The boys' environmental presentation had been a triumph of creativity and practical thinking. Tommy's artistic renderings of green spaces now covered one wall of the guest house living room. while James's carefully researched biodiversity reports and Marcus's implementation strategies were spread across the coffee table. The pride on Alexander's face as he reviewed their work had made the evening feel like a celebration. But now, with the children safely asleep upstairs, the adults sat in stunned silence as Maria, Arthur, and Patricia laid out the evidence of Curtis Montgomery's decades-long manipulation. Sarah's hands gripped her teacup so tightly, her knuckles had turned white, while Alexander stood by the window, his back rigid with barely contained emotion. "He knew," Sarah whispered, staring at the photograph of her younger self with Curtis. "All those times I tried to contact the company, tried to find Alexander. He knew exactly where to find him." "It wasn't just you," Arthur said gently, spreading out his collected cases. "Curtis has been using this technique for years, identifying employees with personal situations he could manipulate, using their vulnerabilities to maintain corporate control." Alexander turned from the window, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The transfer to London, my mother's illness shortly after. He orchestrated all of it." Patricia nodded, her usual corporate polish replaced by genuine remorse. "The timing of your mother's medical emergency was suspicious. I found evidence that Curtis delayed informing you about her condition until it served his purposes." "My God," Alexander ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. "She kept asking for me those final weeks. I thought the messages just weren't getting through because of the international office confusion." Sarah stood, moving to his side. Despite her own pain, her instinct to comfort won out. "You couldn't have known. None of us could." "The system error that denied your assistance," Maria continued, her tablet displaying internal emails. "Curtis personally flagged your application. He wanted you desperate enough to seek help, but not stable enough to fight back." "The boys," Sarah's voice broke slightly. "Everything they went through, all the hardships, and it was all part of his plan?" "A plan that's still in motion," Arthur warned. "The Eastern Continental merger is just phase 1. Curtis is using Alexander's family-friendly initiatives as cover for more aggressive expansion strategies. If he succeeds, more families will be torn apart," Alexander finished, his expression hardening. "More children will suffer while he plays his corporate chess games." A small sound from the stairs made them all turn. Marcus stood there in his pajamas, his face pale but determined. "Is that true?" he asked quietly. "About Mr. Montgomery hurting families on purpose?" Sarah moved quickly to her son, but Marcus held up a hand. "I'm not a baby anymore, Mom. I remember how hard things were. If someone did that to us on purpose, if they're planning to do it to other kids..." His young voice carried a strength that made Alexander's heart swell with pride. "How much did you hear?" Sarah asked gently. "Enough," Marcus replied. "James and Tommy are still asleep, but I was getting water and..." He straightened his shoulders, looking remarkably like his father. "I want to help stop him." The adults exchanged glances. This wasn't how they'd planned to involve the children, but Marcus's natural protective instincts had brought him into their confidence. Perhaps it was fitting. He'd been protecting his family for years already. Alexander moved to stand beside his son. "This is going to be a difficult fight, Marcus. Curtis is powerful, and he's had years to build his influence." "But he's wrong," Marcus said simply. "And we're stronger together than he is alone." "That's what you always taught us, right, Mom? That together we can handle anything?" Sarah felt tears threatening but blinked them back. "Yes, that's right. And now we have more people on our side." She gestured to Maria, Arthur, and Patricia. "More people who want to help make things right. We'll need to..." "Move carefully," Maria cautioned. "Curtis still has significant board support and he'll fight back hard once he realizes we know the truth." "Then we fight smarter," Marcus said, sounding far older than his 7 years. "Like in chess, you taught me that sometimes you have to let your opponent think they're winning before you can show them they've already lost." Alexander looked at his son with newfound appreciation. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the same time I had to figure out how to make 3 sandwiches from half a loaf of bread," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "You learn a lot when you have to." The simple statement hit them all hard, a reminder of the real, human cost of corporate manipulation. Sarah pulled Marcus into a hug, and this time he didn't resist, allowing himself to be a child seeking comfort rather than a protector bearing burdens. "What do we do now?" Patricia asked, watching the family. Moment with a mixture of guilt and determination. "We use the truth," Arthur said firmly. "All of it. Every case, every manipulation, every family affected. We bring it all into the light. And we make sure it never happens again," Alexander added, his hand resting protectively on Marcus's shoulder. "Not to our family. Not to any family." Maria began gathering the evidence into organized files. "I'll start preparing a comprehensive presentation for the independent board members. They need to understand the full scope of Curtis's actions." "I'll contact my journalist connections," Arthur offered. "Start building public pressure without revealing our full hand." As the adults discussed strategy, Marcus yawned despite his best efforts to hide it. Sarah smiled fondly. "Back to bed, sweetheart. We'll need everyone well rested for what's coming." "Promise you'll tell me what happens?" Marcus asked, looking between his parents. "We promise," Alexander assured him. "No more secrets in this family." As Sarah took Marcus back upstairs, the others continued planning their next moves.